Hey everybody, welcome back to Vulnerably Strong. This is where OldYatta and I discuss how being vulnerable can strengthen all types of relationships. So, earlier this year, we put out a couple of intro episodes, but we are back now with our official start to season one. And I thought that the best way to launch season one would be for us to talk a little bit about our origin story.
It make you sound like a comic book, the villain arc.
There we go. I know you like those things, so
Yeah.
maybe that's yeah. And I thought that it might be cool for us to ask each other some questions that we haven't answered before, as a way so that it's not just like a boring story.
Understood.
Okay. So how about you ask a question, I ask a question, and we'll see how that goes.
All right.
Wait, before we do that, I think we should say a little just like who we are. In case people didn't see the intro episodes, you go first.
I'm OldYatta. I'm almost 50 now at this point. Not quite, but I spend time between New York and Houston. I've got 3 kids that are by blood, and I'm an uncle to many. I feel like that's a reasonable intro.
Nice. Okay. And I'm Kira. I go between New York and Houston. New York is the home base. And I am not yet 50. I still got a little bit of time.
Here we go.
But I am also 45 is in the rear, so I'm creeping up behind you. And I have two children by blood. I'll follow your language. The youngest of whom is now in college, and some bonus kids, and yeah. And I'm an educator and a coach by trade, so I sort of love talking about, how to improve your communication, your perspective on things, how to grow. It's kind of my jam, so this should be fun.
All right.
Okay.
So I assume I'm starting.
You can start with the first question.
All right. So I don't know if you saw the I don't know what you call those, the preview episodes, I guess, but I've known her for quite some time. I actually officially met her in middle school, believe it or not. So that's that always blows my mind the more I think about it. Anyway, so I've been curious for a while. Like, what do you think about us circling each other? And even though I met her in middle school, I was born in the Boston area, and she was as well. So we were circling each other before and after our initial meeting, up until relatively recently where we reconnected.
Well, I wasn't born in Boston.
Oh, my bad.
You
right.
Born in
L.A.
But
California.
I moved back to Boston at the age of 2, and yeah, we actually on a recent trip to Boston sort of went and looked at some of the actual places that where I had been before middle school, where he had been before middle school, and realized that we were really super close to one another as little kids as well. So what do I think about us circling before meeting and then also kind of like after?
That's right.
During the time. So, okay, so I think it's weird, especially learning really recently that you went to elementary school directly across the street from the apartment complex that I lived in as a 5 through 10-year-old. That was actually really weird to realize, because I knew that we had lived in the same-ish neighborhood, and that we had some sort of like mutual acquaintances, but it was interesting to see. And then what I already knew was that even though we met in middle school and we were friends for a time, there was this period of time that I call the lost years where we didn't really talk that much.
It's like lost tapes, you know.
Yeah, life happened, and marriages and kids and stuff happened. But I also thought it was interesting that during those kind of lost years, we realized that we had also been in some of the same places. Like, you knew I was in New York, but you had been in New York for other reasons, and we were actually kind of very close to each other at similar times. And so I guess what I think is, I'm kind of like a, I don't know, woo-woo, airy-fairy spiritual person. So for me, it sort of feels like the universe, God, however you look at it, was trying to make that connection, or at least sort of trying to make sure we kind of stayed in each other's orbit. And that was kind of how I thought of it, even during those lost years, you were in my orbit enough, even if we weren't talking. We have a really close, mutual friend. So I could kind of know how you were doing, through that friend. So to me, it's just sort of we were kind of meant to be in each other's orbit until we were ready to, orbit together.
Ooh, that's a close. That's nice. We're ready to orbit together. It's cold. All right.
Okay.
You got a question for me?
I have a question for you, which is, I guess more so, we had this kind of, middle school, early high school kind of puppy love period of time, but I'm going to skip over that and ask more so, what do you remember, or what feels significant to you about our teenage and young adult friendships? So as teenagers and kind of in our, early 20s or so, what?
Oh, 20s. Interesting.
Which is sort of, we were kind of young adults, and we had it had been a very long time since the puppy love period, and we were kind of settled into this idea of just friendship. So what do you remember?
It's interesting you chose that period of time because it's weird. It's I had a lot of feelings, but we weren't really hanging out in that way. You know what I mean? I know you got married in your 20s.
Sure.
I did not.
You did not.
I did not get married in my 20s. But she did, and I thought that was interesting. I thought my whole thing was, I don't know why, but I had this idea that I really just didn't want to. I didn't want to bring anything negative to whatever you had going on. You know what I mean? The feelings I had was I didn't quite know what it was, but I had made some mistakes, but I had strong feelings. So I was yo, I'm here to support whatever it is in a way in which I'm not really close at all. So it's I can't be close enough to ruin anything. You know
I think it's interesting because you were at my wedding because we were friends. Yeah.
Yep.
And we were friends for a couple of years following that, and
I almost got married.
And you almost got married, and I was
got
invited.
Married in that time.
And
I was still older, wasn't I? I wasn't 20s.
You were 29,
29,
almost 30, right?
Yeah.
And I was invited to that celebration, and my ex-husband and I came to that, right? So there was a period where we were for real friends and still trying to keep stay in each other's orbit in a supportive way.
What I did do though was I asked about you quite a bit, but I tried to find clever ways to see about you that were very analog.
Yeah, I asked about you, the friend that I mentioned before, all the time, just kind of how I knew what was going on, but I didn't know. And I don't know that I was thinking about it in terms of, there were feelings, obviously, it was obvious, I cared about you and loved you, but I don't know that it was necessarily that I knew that, or that it felt like strong romantic feelings. It just felt this is a person who I really care about. I want to know how he's doing. And there was a period of time where I couldn't figure out how to get in touch with you. And I wasn't pleased during that period of time. It was kind of like it was like in between that like weird period where like, you know, social media had started, but like, you know, wasn't really a thing. And then when it was a thing, I couldn't really find you. And so I feel like it was just me kind of like wanting to know how you were doing, you know, and that was hard
I get
to do
it.
for a while.
I think my experience wasn't quite like that, and I remembered something while you were talking, of course, and I had strong feelings, maybe more so than you did. It sounds like maybe, but you know, she dumped me twice.
See, this has nothing to do with the question.
No, it does.
As a 13 and 14-year-old, and now we're going off.
No,
Sir,
this
what's
is not
your
a
next
tangent.
question?
This is not a
my
tangent. This isn't a
God.
tangent. You know why? Because I remember thinking, you know, like I kind of liked her from before. You know what I mean? We were a little. She said puppy love and went right through it, but we was boyfriend and girlfriend. But for me, you know, maybe guys work different. I don't know. But to me, I was like, I was not gonna forget that. And I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm a grudge holder, but I remember things. You know, I remember strongly. And so I was like, I know this ain't that, and I don't want to mess nothing up. But also, you know, I might be a bit much. I don't know. She might not be into this. She might not be into this flavor. Even as a friend, it's unclear. You know what I mean? I'm a little over the top on occasion. So I remember that was, laugh if you want, but that was one of the reasons why I was like, oh, you know what? Oh, how's she doing? Oh, that's cool. Well, tell me more. You know what I'm saying? What's going on with Joan? You seen Joan? You seen her at the thing? Okay, how's she doing? What's up with her?
Yeah, I mean, I think dumped you twice is crazy, but
Twice.
Yes, as a child, I say
whatever, man.
as a young girl.
Yeah, I was a child too.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I would say I had strong feelings, definitely during that puppy love phase, but just, you know, didn't know what to do with them, right? And then,
fair enough.
And then I think I had strong feelings during that friendship phase, and it was more so, just really like caring about you and not knowing like how to demonstrate that care in a way, again, like once we were kind of both you know, in our lives, like similarly, like not wanting to sort of mess up anything you had or disrespect anything, but then also kind of feeling like, yeah, but this is my friend who I've known, you know, forever, and like I just want to know like how he's doing or if he's happy or, you know, whatever. Okay, your next question.
All right. You know, it's funny. It's just a little short preamble. I spent maybe, I don't know, 10 years growing up on and off in Boston. Oh, I couldn't have been 10. I guess it had to be more like 15 years on and off living in Boston. But I left, ironically, for me, it was kind of like the beginning of the middle school years. And then when we hooked up, it was like my last year of middle school. Is that right? Is that true? Yeah. It's my last year in middle school. So I think I left to go to Philly for 5, 6, and 7th grade, you know? And so when I showed up back, I really wasn't really trying to be bull from Boston or from Roxbury or from Jamaica Plain or any of those. These are just Boston hoods. I wasn't really too interested in that because I didn't feel connected to the place because we moved around quite a bit. But you know, since we go more often now for different things, and I have wondered, you know, if you thought the city itself played a role in our story.
It's interesting because you moved around quite a bit, like between Boston and Philly as a kid. I moved around quite a bit in like the Boston metropolitan and kind of suburban area. So I didn't feel super connected to the city of Boston because, you know, the school that we went to was sort of, you know, in a suburb 10 or 15 minutes right outside of Boston, and then most of the places where my parents moved around to were also kind of removed from the city. So this, childhood friend of mine who we have in common, her home was kind of like my Boston home base and my grandmother's home, but you and I didn't really interact much there. Like most of our interaction as kids was at school, and then as young adult friends, it was, kind of in all these weird places, right? Like a little bit of Philly, a little bit of North Carolina, a little bit of New York, a little, Maryland, so, but I do think that now that we have reconnected as adults, together, we go back more often because we both have family there. And it's almost like we're both sort of like reconnecting to Boston in this new way, with our kids and kind of creating the Boston part of our story 35 years later or whatever.
Which is wild because I for real spent, like, when I think about it, like I would have never identified more with Philly than Boston, even though I was born in Boston, spent, like I said, 15 years on and off. And she's 100% correct. I was going between Boston and Philly for the most of that time, and then a little bit between Boston and Maryland after that, but Southern Maryland, I should say. But I didn't feel connected to that place at all. I probably felt more of a connection to Southern Maryland before Boston, and now it's like I wouldn't say I necessarily love the city.
Of Boston.
Yeah, of Boston. I wouldn't say that, but there is an odd nostalgia, and just in the last few trips, because like she said, we still have family that live there. The last few trips, I've realized there is a uniqueness to the city that makes an interesting backdrop for the adults that we are. Because I don't think we are the same people without. I mean, I can't speak for you. I feel like I now have to admit that I'm not the same person without those 15 years in the being.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would probably say Massachusetts as a whole, just because my experience was more like Massachusetts and
you
Boston.
definitely got more.
But I do think that there was a unique...
More mass than me.
There was a unique perspective as, a 47-year-old black woman who grew up in Massachusetts, but left at the age of 17, really. It's another reason why I don't feel super connected to it. And then has lived most of my adult life in New York, which, you wouldn't think is vastly different, and probably isn't vastly different, but there is a way that I think sort of the diversity of New York ultimately kind of like helped me to be comfortable in my own skin in a way that I don't know would have happened as naturally or easily had I stayed in Massachusetts. So,
yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Yep.
I guess I'll ask this question, which is, so we, we had this young adult friendship time up until about 30 for the both of us, and then we kind of lost touch for I'd say a good 7 or 8 years, and then we reestablished a connection, but on a very kind of surfacey level, right? Like, happy birthday, Merry Christmas, how's your family? Oh, how old are your kids? Right? That sort of thing. And then during that time, I separated and divorced. And then, you separated and started divorcing. And then we kind of started actually like reestablishing the friendship and not not the surface level conversations, but really more so of like, how's your life, right? And so my question in that is, why do you think it was so easy to reestablish the friendship and to really, because this is a podcast about vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that when we reconnected, even though we hadn't had any deep conversations, right? We had just been sort of like, how are you? How are you? You know, we hadn't had any really deep conversations probably in 15 years at that point. Why do you think it was so easy for us to reestablish the connection and just sort of, you know, dive right back into like a meaningful friendship?
Well, I think a lot of things. Actually, you know, the question I posed before, I think, is part of it. Like, I think I lived in North Carolina for like a year. I lived in D.C. for 5 years. I never actually lived as an adult in Boston. As soon as I turned 18, I bounced, you know. But it provides a framework. Like, there's certain things that I just didn't have to explain, and I think that's what made it really easy. I think some of that has to do with like landmarks and I will tell a story over and over, you know, but it's not to say that I want to be doing that when I'm having feelings and all of that all the time. I kind of, you know, will drone, but I think what made it really easy is that I didn't really have to. The experience wasn't like starting all over from scratch in the beginning. There was Adam. It wasn't really like that, you know. It was more like, hey, you remember you ever do this thing in Boston? Yeah, well, around the corner from there, you know, it's like one of those things, you know. It was like, I'm using that as an example, but it's the fact that, you know, we circled each other even in New York, which I didn't know, you know. Like, I had I was one of those cats in Boston that didn't really think it was fascinating to move to New York. Like, I guess because I already had a New York life to a certain extent. I knew what it was. It was a known quantity. So it wasn't like I thought, you know, there's going to be, you know, I'm a child of hip hop. I didn't think it was going to be like ciphers on every corner and, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just didn't, you know, I was like, where, bro? Like you know, I was kind of cynical even then, you know. Oh, you saying wrap it up? Okay. Wrap it up. No, I think it's the familiarity. Okay. It's like, you know, the place that we went to high school. Well, I met her in middle school, but we did middle school and high school at the same school. So there are references for high school. There are references for New England. There are references for Boston. We have people that we know in common. So when we're catching up, or I'm catching up with people who know her, it's like I can get a quick beat. So there's just a bunch of things I never had to really explain, and least of which of those is like personality, slang. It's like, it's a lot. I would have never thought this would be the case. I would say the differences, and I still think differences are kind of a flavor between two people. So if you're totally different than me, I like the chances, you know. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it wasn't really like that. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. You have one more question for me?
Of course. It's kind of the same question, really.
Is it?
It's very similar. Why do you think? So we had a reconnect. We were kind of circling back and forth, like we mentioned, in email and through friends, and, you know, somehow I didn't run into her in none of these places. I don't know how that happened, you know. And I went. It's not dark for me because, you know, my kids used to call me the dip man. Like, I'm out of here. Like, you know, it's hard to get in touch with me, you know, if we don't have a role in this phase of life. You know what I mean? But you know, we had a conversation when I was separated, and the conversation was one of the most vulnerable. I think I, at least, was probably the most vulnerable I had probably ever been with a woman, I'll say, for sure. And probably anyone, you know what I mean? And I was just, I don't know, I was exhausted. I was just exhausted about so many things. You know, I had burned out of work. You know, I kind of burned out of the relationship that I was in at the time. You know, I was just so tired, like just so tired, you know. And I'm one of these type of people that I'm trying to, okay, let me get myself together. let me get to my feet. That's how the men used to talk when I was younger. Okay, you can get down, but you don't stay down. So I get to my feet to go do the next thing. And I was just so tired that I was just raw and vulnerable, If you ever wanted to know anything, I think there was a week where I was like that. And this conversation happened in that week. Okay. And I think the vulnerability for me is what I attribute that conversation. But I've always wanted to know, what was it for you? Like, what on your side, what did that look like?
It's interesting, yeah, because I was not raw in that way, right? I had been divorced for a while, 7 or 8 years at that point. I think for me, it was just actually getting to connect with you, because I had wanted to connect with you, like, as my friend for a really long time. So there was sort of the excitement in like, oh, like, we're actually gonna get to have like a real conversation, beyond like Merry Christmas, Happy Birthday, oh, my kids are this age now.
How's the home?
Yeah, and that conversation that you're talking about, I very much remember. I was not at all thinking about us romantically, but I did have a very strong feeling of like, oh, I'm so glad like he's back in my life again. So that was one piece of it. And then the other piece is honestly like, I could tell you weren't okay. And that made me really sad. And I just wanted to sort of like, most people actually, like, it's like a strength of mine, but also a flaw. Like, I just want to, like, caretake and advise and, like, help people get to a better place, right? I said that at the beginning, right? Like, it's like the teacher, counselor, coach, educator in me. And so I think in that first conversation, that's my memory of, sort of seeing where you were at. For me, what was impactful for me in the conversation was the do you remember and the kind of catching up, because I had this narrative, like how he has the narrative of
I was dumped twice.
He was dumped twice, right, by a 13, 14-year-old girl. I had this narrative of we had broken up, and I didn't actually remember the details of the second time why. The first time I remembered. But whatever. That's neither here nor there right now. But
convenient.
I had the memory that we had broken up, but that, at however old I was, that by, at age 15, I really, really felt like, I'm super in love with this person and I want to be with him. And we had kind of moved into this phase of friendship, and I didn't know how to get out of the friend zone. And as a 15-year-old, as I'm trying to get out of the friend zone, he started a relationship with someone else. And he had this other girlfriend who I did not think was a good choice for him. Just be quiet and let me finish answering my question. I didn't think this person was a good choice for him. I didn't think she was particularly kind, or honest. And but my memory, real or perceived, my memory was that, like, I then went through the rest of this sort of high school phase, which for me was 10th, 11th grade, that he was there because he was a year older than me, where I had this unrequited love, right? And in that conversation, that first conversation, I sort of like jokingly said, when we were in high school, like, I was in love with you the whole time, or something like that. And he says, as he's saying now, my memory is you were confusing and I think I got dumped or whatever. I think you fired me or whatever. But
that's 100%.
But as we unraveled it, and I sort of, I had this box of keepsakes where I had notes that I had written you and things, and I sent you, pictures of these things, and you were really like, oh snap, I never knew. And then we kind of reconciled the story of, that it wasn't actually unrequited love. It was more so that, I was confusing as a teenage girl. Go figure. A confusing teenage girl. What's that about? And I think just that moment of clarifying that, like, there were feelings on both sides, because I felt like it. I felt like we were so close, and we were such good friends, and then it was just like everything changed in my mind, in my 15-year-old mind, right? Once this girl came along, everything changed, and like our friendship changed just for this period of time in high school, like then, whatever. But to know that on his side, I still mattered, I guess, and that I was still sort of like cared for, it was a really like healing conversation for me, because I don't think I realized until we had that conversation, like how much I took that feeling of like, you can love someone really hard and they just won't love you back. I took a lot of that into my young adulthood. And so I think it was just, that part especially was really impactful for me in the reconnection.
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty.
Okay. So anyway, that's a little bit about us. This is us being vulnerable, right? And this is kind of what we do, right? We have these conversations, and then as we sort of talk about things, a lot of our episodes stem from, we had a conversation, could this conversation be beneficial to someone else? So, as we're on our road trips, or walking around the neighborhood, or sitting on the couch, or whatever we're doing, sometimes watching a TV show and debriefing it, we pull on these threads of, vulnerability and connection, and try to make it, relatable and discuss it. So that's what we'll be trying to do, and hopefully you'll find some of it helpful, useful, interesting.
Oh man, you said it all pretty much. I think it's tough for different reasons. Well, I like these conversations is, one, I'm getting something out of it, right? Most of the time I get to learn something new, or communicate, find ways to communicate effectively, I would say. But you'd be surprised what a conversation can do. I think I'm fascinated by that, but I also think like having the bravery to be vulnerable, is a strength that probably isn't evaluated enough.
One thing I would add is, so we kind of gave the arc of like how long we've known each other, and when we were, the time that we were apart, and now we're in this phase of life partnership.
It's accurate.
And we've been in that phase now for a little over 4 years, and it's great.
Yeah, I'm enjoying myself
It's
quite
great.
a bit.
And there's challenges, right? Like we mentioned, right? We're going between two cities, so we're together a lot, but we're apart some of the time. We come into the relationship with children, right? And so there's a when we're not a blended family, that my children are adults, and we don't, but we are in our children's lives, and so there's a kind of supporting each other through that element. There's just our both very strong personalities, right? And the 40-some years before we came together that we're both coming into it with, and so communication style. So, this is, a podcast where we'll tell pieces and parts of our love story, but also some of the pieces and parts of our love story are real, right? And sort of some of the how we navigate some of the challenges. And so stay tuned.
That's right. That's right.
Because I think we're looking forward to being able to maybe, just share some perspective and tidbits that, may be helpful to others.
That's a fact.
Yeah,
All right. Well, that's an actual episode. If you are interested in the prequels, so to speak, there's some good tidbits in there as we're trying to work things out, like how we're gonna do it, where we're gonna be. But look forward, stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.